Welcome to the FightWrite podcast, a writer's resource for writing fight scenes, action, and violence. I am your host, Carla Hoke. If you keep up with my blog, FightWrite, FightWrite.net, you know that I'm smack in the middle of doing a series on emergency scene calls and what happens from the 911 call all the way to the morgue. And I believe that I mentioned that the podcast series would follow that, and it will, starting in the next episode. I put that off a bit to answer a writer question because I love writer questions. Jebraun Clifford said that she is writing a fight scene in 0G and would like a little info on that. Guys, look up this writer at Jebraun Clifford, JebraunClifford.com. That again, JebraunClifford.com. She is a transplant Kiwi down in New Zealand and a lovely person and writer. 0G is one of the few things I didn't discuss in my book, FightWrite, How to Write Believable Fight Scenes with Writer's Digest, which makes me think that a book 2 is in order. I don't know, we'll see. However, I did touch on fighting in 0G in my blog, FightWrite.net, last November. I will post a link to Twitter at Carla Hoke, CarlaHoch, and publicly on my Facebook page, Carla Cook Hoke. Much of this podcast is from that post, but I have added in a few extra details just for Jebraun because she is awesome. Okay. Anytime I explain how something works in fighting, or doesn't work for that matter, I try my best to use science for several reasons. One, science is something to which we can all relate. You don't have to know a thing about fighting to understand the science of fighting, and fighting is a science. Two, science does not change. Fighting's fickle, science is stubborn. Also, science is much smarter than me. Just saying. That said, if you have magic in your manuscript, or if it is a work of sci-fi with technology we don't have yet, some of this may not apply. If that's the case, your reader should be aware of the physical laws of your world. All right, let me stop there. If your work in progress has elements that are outside of reality, you must establish normalcy. The very first line of The Hobbit is, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." That tells the reader right off that the work has elements outside of what is normal. So if your 0G scene breaks the natural laws of science, which it can, you have to show the reader that those broken laws are normal. All right, for this podcast, I am going to look at fighting in 0G under the constraints of modern science. So let's put on our Sir Isaac Newton pants and look at all his laws of motion. Or at least the 3 I know. Law 1, an object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object in motion tends to stay at motion. Things on Earth slow down because of the opposing force of gravity. On the International Space Station, however, if you push yourself off of a wall, you will keep going until you hit something. And you better hope you hit something, because if you don't, you will just keep on going until Jesus comes for you. How can you use that to your advantage in fisticuffs? Well, you push your opponent. It won't take much. A little nudge could send them off into oblivion if they aren't anchored in some way. If you do hit them, but now you got to remember, what I'm about to say with hitting applies to punching as well. If you hit them or punch them, they will propel away from you until something stops them, which is all well and good, until the third law of motion comes into play. I'll get to law 2 in a minute. Law 3 says for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So if I hit you, if I push you, I in turn am pushing myself away from you with that same amount of force. That puts me in a real pickle. And before you say, it's not a big deal, there's a wall behind my character. Let's say that they're in, again, a contained room in the International Space Station. Remember that your character will be hitting that wall equal to the force of their punch. And if their momentum is circular, as with a hook punch, the character might end up spinning until they something stops them from spinning with a force that's equal to their punch. The way to work around the first law also helps with the third law. Your character would hold on to their opponent, and they'd probably do well to grasp the combatant on the center line of their body, say the chest of their clothing, because that would give your character a point of reference for their strike. When the body starts spinning, your character could get disoriented. Having their hand below their combatant's face or neck would give them a point of reference to guide their aim, no matter how their body is moving around in space. But I tell you, if it were me, I wouldn't punch at all because of the second law of motion. I'm sorry, I'm having to move some things so that my cat doesn't knock them off. Come on, hun. All right, law 2 is force equals mass times acceleration. Law 1 explains that an object at rest tends to stay at rest. Law 2 shows that a resting state changes when the object is subjected to an external force. And law 2 is mass times acceleration equals force. And that's really, really important when it comes to fighting, law 2. I only know how to punch on earth. On earth, I am able to create force for my strike by getting as much of my mass and acceleration into that equation literally as possible. Now, I'm going to say speed from here on out. Speed is acceleration with a target, with one specific place in mind. Directed, there you go, directed acceleration. To get the mass of my body behind my punch, as well as create acceleration, I need rotation in my upper body. That rotation is a result of torque in my hips. That torque, or twisting motion, is given speed as well as stability by the pivot of my feet on the ground. I promise, all this is true. If you ever have a chance to go to one of my writing classes, that's the tactical portion where I actually kind of show different fight moves, I go through this. My feet remain anchored to the ground. That's where all the power starts, is down in the feet. And they remain anchored to the ground while pivoting because of friction. That's my cat. If you hear the knocking, that's my cat. Whatever, girl. Okay, I've stepped in sweat before while I was sparring and pivoted and hit the mat because the liquid inhibited my friction. I basically slipped. It took away my hold on the ground, and the torque in my hips set me off balance. That friction is crucial to the entire movement that creates force in a punch. And the thing about friction is that it needs gravity. So, I personally don't see from free floating a punch in 0G would have very much force for the simple fact it does not have an anchor. So I don't see how you could get your mass behind your acceleration. Now, by propelling off a wall, you could create acceleration to go with your mass and create a ton of force with that punch. But that's going to send you flying, don't forget. I just, from free floating, I don't see how it's all that scientifically doable. I've read fight scenes where, you had beings that were able to fly and they're punching each other while they're in the air, but they're still while they're punching, as if they're on the ground, but all the moves are the same, it's just they're up in the air. And that's just not how fighting works, because that's just, blame Isaac Newton, don't blame me, okay? He's the one that proved it. You really have to be in contact with the ground. Punching in 0G is a problem, again, because it brings in momentum. It sends me and my opponent banging around the walls of the 0G room, and let's hope there's walls, and the equipment, up against the equipment in the room. I could feasibly be knocked out by whatever I'm propelled into. It takes next to no effort to move in 0G, and I have a video of that on the FightWrite blog post. I think it's from the International Space Station. I love those videos. They're so cool. There's also the issue of blood from a busted nose, split forehead, lip, etc. Liquids in space are real squirrely. They move around in bubbles, so you kind of have a traveling mess. I have a video of floating liquid also on FightWrite.net. It's very, very cool. The mess isn't the biggest problem with free floating blood. The biggest problem is you could inhale it and aspirate on it. Okay, aspirate means to inhale liquid into the lungs, and that's a problem for a character immediately because the liquid could block the airways and you asphyxiate. By the way, that is why breaking your nose in a fight is an issue. When you see fighters' noses bleeding, you're only seeing the blood that's coming forward down the face. Some of that blood is going down their throat, and they have to breathe through their mouth, mouth only versus mouth and nose, which gives them less oxygen. If at any point they cough and, that blood gets in their mouth or, even just flowing down their throat, they could breathe in some of that. So you don't want blood floating around the air if possible, unless you have on a spacesuit, and then it's not an issue. But then again, I really don't see how you could bust somebody's nose or lip if they have on a helmet. But anyway, I'll get to spacesuits in just a minute. If there is no spacesuit involved, the characters are free-floating, I personally would employ a choke. And I'm not talking about a stranglehold. I mean capturing the neck in such a way that blood flow is impeded, which leads to unconsciousness. Okay, something like a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu choke. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, as opposed to Japanese Jiu Jitsu, they aren't the same. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is a fantastic resource for 0G because Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, the grappling kind of exists in a sphere. You can catch just about every move, even if you were free floating. Gravity on Earth, because it's what we have to deal with, we can use it to help us get into position, but gravity has nothing to do with submission. But again, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there is something called mount, and that's when you are seated astride your opponent's stomach. Okay, well, there's also a position that's called being in the guard, and that's when you are stuck sitting upright between your opponent's legs. Well, if you're in space, those positions are very similar. It's just a matter of flipping them. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu it's a really good resource for 0G. Okay, while I am impeding blood flow to the opponent's neck, and you got to do it on both sides of the neck, and you're not crushing the airway, that obviously is an option. Okay, if you want to dispatch of the person in 0G, you would choke them in a regular strangled choke. I've also heard it called a rape choke. I hate to call it that, but that's what it is. And you can crush the windpipe. Okay, there you go, fight over. If that opponent needs to stay alive, then that is when you would do a blood choke. And for a blood choke, you have to impede blood flow on both sides of the neck. So you can feel a pulse. Even if you put pressure on your neck with your own hand on either side of your throat, of your windpipe, you can feel the blood flow kind of being knocked off or cut off there. When you are employing that choke, I think it would be when your character is employing that choke, I think it would be a very good idea for that character to also isolate the legs of their combatant, because when they're in that blood choke, they're going to kick and thrash out of panic. That kick could create momentum, which might propel the characters around the room and cause them to hit something. If your character can manage to be anchored to something while they're choking that person, then the legs maybe aren't that big of an issue. Otherwise, they need to apply the choke and wrap their legs around their combatant's legs if possible. If I choose the right kind of choke, here's the problem with the throat crush choke. It also leaves you open. If you choose the right sort of choke, you don't have to worry about guarding your own neck. All right. With the throat crush choke, you are actually leaving your neck very open because your hands are extended. They're out in front of your body. Boom. Your throat is open. A lot of times you'll find that the method you use to attack somebody, you're also leaving yourself open and kind. When I punch somebody, I'm open to a punch. When I kick, I'm open to a kick. And if I'm reaching out and putting my hands around your throat, well, I'm leaving myself open for the same. Another problem that is, it is very easy to escape from that choke. I teach self-defense, and one of the first things I teach is how to escape that strangle choke, and it's just not that hard. And not only can you defend yourself against it pretty easily, you can turn around and attack the throat of your attacker. So I'm not sure if the stranglehold choke is something that I would employ between two characters who both know something about fighting. Now, the reason the stranglehold choke works, for people that, I don't know, serial killers or whatever that choke their poor victims to death, it's because they don't know how to defend themselves. And the regular everyday person, they probably don't. And being in that situation sends you in a panic and you can't think. And if you haven't trained for that, then you're probably not going to defend yourself well. So it makes sense that one character would put a stranglehold or a rape choke on another character and that other character be strangled or choked to death. Also, it happens really, really fast. And so you have to respond fast. But again, it makes sense that the person would not know how to defend themselves because the majority of the public doesn't. And why would you? Fighting is a language all its own. When I teach different classes on fighting, I usually start out by saying something in a foreign language. It used to be Spanish, but everybody speaks Spanish now. So I'll say, "Quem fala português?" And I'll wait, and nobody says anything, and I'll say something else in Portuguese. I'll say the few things that I know in Portuguese, and I'll say, "Why didn't you understand me?" It's not because you're not intelligent. It's not because you're not educated. It's simply because you have not learned that particular language. It doesn't make sense for people to be born knowing how to fight. It is a learned skill. So, I tell writers all the time, especially men, no one expects you to automatically know how to fight any more than they expect you to know how to speak every language that there is. Do you have the capacity to learn every language that there is? Absolutely, of course, just like you have the capacity to learn how to fight. Fighting is a science, and you can learn it. But just like learning a language, you're going to have to find a teacher, and you're going to have to take time. Now, that's why I wrote FightWrite, How to Write Believable Fight Scenes, because we don't all have time in our day to go learn Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, to Muay Thai, Kung Fu, Taekwondo, Aikido, Judo. I have experience in all those, by the way. Kung Fu, that's not fair to say. It's not fair to say I have experience in Kung Fu. Kind of Fu. I know the crap out of kind of Fu. Kung Fu, not so much. Okay, but see, I digress. I've gotten off subject here. There's a couple chokes that I personally would use if I were in that 0G situation. And you know what? Now I'm sitting here. Y'all, I live right outside Houston. NASA is here. Why I did not think to call an astronaut and ask them this, I could absolutely die that I did not do that. Because you know what? Astronauts live here. Maybe at some point I'll get a chance to interview an astronaut on what he or she would do in this situation. Hey, maybe I'll get a little patch to the ISS and ask the folks up there how they would handle it. Because, I wonder if they do teach them how to defend themselves before getting on the International Space Station. Because they're in the military. They used to be. They used to be Navy pilots that were astronauts. I don't know how it works now that it's privatized, but it makes sense that if you're going somewhere like that, they would teach you how to defend yourself. Again, I'm digressing. I'm so sorry. All right, if your character is directly in front of their combatant, they could do what's called an Ezekiel choke. I have a video of that on the blog post. It used to be a video example from a UFC fight, but the UFC got their fight shorts in a wad and they took it down off my blog. And you know what? That is just fine. I just realized this a week ago, and so if up until recently you've gone to the blog and you've not been able to see a video example of the Ezekiel choke, I am so sorry. I have another video up now that is even better than the UFC example. Thank you very much. And it's from my buddy Kent Peters at Zombie Proof Jiu Jitsu. If you look up other Ezekiel chokes on YouTube, you may see the use of sleeves. And if your character has sleeves, then go for it. Use the sleeves in that sort of choke. But there is a version that doesn't require sleeves, and it's called a no-gi Ezekiel. It's called that because you don't need no gi to do it. That's pretty much grammatically correct, I think. If the combatant has a sturdy collar, your attacker, if they are in front of them, could also employ what's called an X choke, but that does require the opponent to have a sturdy collar around their neck because you hold on to it in order to accomplish that choke. If the attacker is behind his combatant, I suggest a rear naked choke. Those are super easy. Examples of that are super easy to find on YouTube. I don't think I have that on the blog, but I can definitely post a rear naked choke video on the blog. No big deal. Okay. There are other chokes that are a possibility. And if you know other chokes that could be employed in this situation, you probably don't even need this podcast. And that's super awesome. But those are a few ones that are pretty easy to figure out visually. You can see pretty well what's going on, which makes it much easier to write. Now, I don't suggest going into heavy detail on the technique. For example, on the rear naked choke, you could just say, okay, we'll use two characters, Ace and Bob. Ace, Bob, A-B. Ace, Bob. That's boring names. I'm giving that way too much thought. Okay, Ace and Bob. All right, so instead of saying Ace, knock Bob out with a rear naked choke. Okay, you're going to have to establish that one is in front and one is behind and their positioning. So instead you can say they collided chest to back. Ace quickly wrapped his arm around Bob's neck and pulled Bob close, resting his cheek against the back of Bob's neck. Ace closed his eyes and held fast until Bob's panic thrashing ceased, until all that was left was the throbbing of Bob's jugular against Ace's bicep. Now, did I say anything about a rear naked choke? No, but I've established their position. I have told you how close they are by saying that Ace put his face against the back of Bob's neck. We know that Bob has ceased moving, yet he is still alive because we talked about the beating of his jugular. You can feel that against your skin, by the way. It beats pretty hard. And the further description you have could explain that he's just unconscious. And I'm going to tell you what, if your characters, if one is choked out, don't assume they're going to stay knocked out. They do not stay knocked out very long, just until blood flow has made up for the lack of O2, the O2 debt in the brain, just a few seconds. Okay, so don't think that one is going to apply a blood choke and the other character is going to be unconscious for the rest of the chapter or for the next couple pages. No, you just have a few seconds there, but it will be long enough for Ace to get away. Although, I wonder how fast you would come to in zero G. No, you would, because even in zero G, if they're in a space station or something, it's pressurized, so blood flow should be the same. Okay, now let's say they are wearing suits that prevent that sort of choking. I would have the characters attack the other's O2 supply or attempt to breach the suit of the other. If you have a character stab into the suit, the pressure of it is compromised, okay? And that's a problem. Sorry, let me get a drink. Here's why. According to iflscience.com, let me get to that real quick. All right, they say the pressure in the vacuum of space is so low that the boiling point of the fluids in your body decreases below the body's normal temperature. This results in the formation of gas bubbles in your fluids that can really mess you up. Your blood will not boil. Don't let people tell you that. Your blood doesn't boil. You will swell up pretty bad, perhaps even to twice your normal size, but you won't explode because your skin is very stretchy. Holy moly, that is super gross, and I would love to see an animation of that. I don't want to see a real version of that, but I'd like to see an animation of that because that is crazy. So breaching the suit is enough to kill an opponent. If you do stab them, and it does breach the body, not only is the body going to push blood out, but because of the pressure difference, blood's going to be pulled out of the body. if the wound is big enough, I wouldn't doubt that organs could also come out through that wound. Now, if you're in a spacesuit, you don't have to worry about asphyxiating on the blood or aspirating, I guess is what you would say, aspirating on the blood, but it's still going to be a mess and it can get all over your helmet and impede your vision. And you also, I guess, have to consider that if you stab them without having a secure hold on them, that you could be propelled away from them. So I would have a secure hold on my combatant if I were going to stab them. But you know what? When you're close enough to stab somebody, they're close enough to stab you. So you're going to have to explain why one is stabbing the other, why only one has a knife. Astronauts do carry a knife, and they carry a specific knife. Look up astronaut's knife. I don't know what it's called, but it's a knife that was designed for them and the task that they have to do in space. Okay, now if your weapon is sci-fi, like a lightsaber, consider the movement you need to wield it and how it will affect your orientation in space. The thing about lightsabers, okay, if I cut your arm off with a lightsaber, I've cauterized the wound. So the portion of the arm that's still, the stub attached to your body, that's not going to be bleeding because it's going to be cauterized. However, both sides are going to be cauterized. That's the thing about the lifesaver. It cauterizes the wound. I don't know why nobody, I'll tell you what, if you strike somebody with a lightsaber, you better make it count. And I hope that gives you all some ideas for your work, especially you, Jebraun. Thank you so much for buying my book and asking that question. Listeners, check her out at Jebraun Clifford, Jebraun Clifford, CLIFFORD.com. I am happy to answer any question you guys send me. It's literally one of my favorite things to do. Plus, I'll give you a shout out. You can get questions to me on the Twitter at Carla Hoch, CarlaHoch. Of course, through the contact form on FightWrite, FightWrite.net. I'm on the Instagram at Carla, Carla. That's right. That's how you spell my name, right? Carla.c.hoch, Hoch. I do. I love this. This was probably one of my favorite podcasts to do, if not my favorite so far, because I love researching these questions and figuring out the answers to them, especially when I can apply science to it, because science is fun. And I almost have a science degree. This is one of my, this is one of my dirty little, it's not a dirty secret, but it's one of my secrets. I lack 3 credit hours being able to teach biology. And I lack maybe 9 hours, maybe. I don't know if I'm counting lab hours in there from having a biology degree. It's ridiculous. Why I didn't finish it? I don't know. Don't ask me. Don't judge me. Okay? This isn't a place of judgment. This is a safe place. Anyway, I love my job and I love when I can apply science to it. I'm so blessed. That's it, you guys. Check out my book, FightWrite, FightWrite, How to Write Believable Fight Scenes. It's available in all the big chain bookstores and some of the little bookstores, both in the U.S. and abroad and online. If you buy it, if you read it, please leave a review on Amazon and Goodreads. I would greatly appreciate it. You know what, guys? I think that's it for the FightWrite podcast today, where we have thoroughly covered Zero G as much as I could. What can I say? I think we've done a lot of good here today. Until the next round at FightWrite Podcast, get blood on your pages.